There are moments in life that don't feel important when they're happening. Moments you brush off as insignificant, like a fleeting annoyance or a minor inconvenience. Moments you joke about later with friends over coffee, turning them into lighthearted anecdotes to mask the unease they once stirred. Moments that only reveal their true weight years after the damage is done. When hindsight sharpens the edges and exposes the cracks you never noticed. This story begins with one of those moments. A phone that wouldn't get answered. Its ring echoing into an empty void. A dorm room door that wouldn't open, stubbornly sealed against pleas and reason. And a man who, at the time, felt like nothing more than an unpleasant memory, a bad date, a creepy encounter to laugh off and forget. But he wasn't just that. He was a warning sign flashing in the dark, ignored until it was too late for someone else. And weeks later, he would become known as the MySpace killer, a name that would etch itself into headlines and nightmares alike. To understand why this story still haunts me, lingering like a shadow in the corners of my mind, you have to understand the time it happened. This was 2005, a world before the sleek glow of iPhones dominated our pockets. No read receipts to confirm if your message had been seen or ignored. No live location sharing to pinpoint a friend's whereabouts in real time. Social media wasn't the polished, algorithm-driven machine it is today, filtered through layers of safety features, content warnings, and privacy settings. It was raw, unrefined, and wildly unregulated. Platforms like MySpace were digital playgrounds where people poured out their souls, favorite bands, angsty poems, unfiltered photos from flip phones. It was deeply personal, almost intimate, but with none of the safeguards we take for granted now. You didn't Google people easily back then. Search engines were clunky, and personal information wasn't a commodity traded in data brokers' databases. You didn't assume strangers could find your address with a few clicks, or trace your daily routine through geotagged posts. When someone disappeared for a few hours, whether on a date, at a party, or just out for a walk, all you had was silence. And silence, in its vast emptiness, was terrifying. It amplified every worst-case scenario your imagination could conjure. She was someone I knew well, a close friend whose laughter could light up even the dreariest college days. Someone smart, with a quick wit that cut through nonsense like a knife. Funny, the kind who could turn a mundane story into a hilarious epic with just the right timing. Independent, fiercely so she navigated life on her own terms, trusting her instincts to guide her through the chaos of young adulthood. But even the strongest instincts can falter, and on one fateful night, she trusted the wrong person. That night started out ordinary, as so many dangerous nights do. A casual meetup arranged through campus chatter. Nothing out of the ordinary in the whirlwind of college life. A guy from UMBC, the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, someone who seemed harmless enough in the brief interactions leading up to it. Nothing dramatic, no red flags waving boldly in the wind. Just two people connecting in a time when connections felt simpler, less scrutinized. Until she stopped answering her phone. I called her once, the ringtone buzzing in my ear like a distant alarm. No answer. I tried again, my thumb hovering over the redial button with growing unease. Still, nothing. At first, I told myself I was overreacting, that she was probably just caught up in conversation, or had her phone on silent. People flake sometimes. Life gets busy, but then minutes stretched into an hour, each one heavier than the last. Texts went unanswered, piling up in my outbox like unspoken worries. Voicemails accumulated, my voice growing more strained with each recording. Hey, just checking in. Call me back. That familiar pit formed in my stomach, the one you get when your body knows something your brain hasn't fully accepted yet. It's a primal signal, a knot of dread that tightens with every unanswered second. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of pacing and staring at my phone, it rang. Her voice was barely above a whisper, controlled but laced with an undercurrent of panic that she couldn't quite hide. Tight, like she was forcing the words out through clenched teeth. She said she was locked inside a guy's dorm room at UMBC, not stuck by accident, not confused about the layout, locked, deliberately. She told me he wouldn't let her leave, that he had secured the door and was blocking her path, that something felt very, very wrong. An intuition screaming in the quiet spaces between her words. I didn't think, I reacted on pure instinct, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. I told her to put him on the phone, my voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through me. When he spoke, my blood went cold, freezing in my veins like ice water. He wasn't apologetic, fumbling for excuses or explanations. He wasn't nervous, his words trembling with the fear of consequences. He was irritated, annoyed, as if we were inconveniencing him with our concerns, disrupting his twisted sense of control. There was something in his tone that made the hair on my arms stand up, a chill that seeped into my bones, detached, like he was observing the situation from a remove, untouched by empathy, mocking, with a subtle edge that suggested he was enjoying the power dynamic far too much. Enjoying the control he wielded over her, and now, indirectly, over me. We argued, our voices rising in a heated exchange that echoed through the phone line. I told him I was already on my way to campus, my car keys jingling in my hand as I spoke. I told him this wouldn't end well for him if she wasn't out of that room immediately, that authorities would be involved, that his actions had crossed a line. And then I hung up, the click of the call ending feeling like a declaration of war. That drive felt endless, a torturous journey through the night. Every traffic light turned red just as I approached, mocking my urgency with their unyielding glow. Every slow car in front of me felt intentional, a deliberate obstacle placed by fate to test my resolve. Your mind does terrible things when adrenaline meets fear, spinning out scenarios like a horror film reel. I imagined doors slammed shut with finality, trapping her in darkness, voices raised in anger, escalating to something irreversible. Things happening that I couldn't stop, shadowy visions of violence that made my grip tighten on the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The road blurred through the windshield, my thoughts racing faster than the car. Then my phone rang again, piercing the tense silence of the drive. She said she had gotten out. I don't know how exactly, whether she talked her way free, found a moment of distraction, or summoned a burst of courage to push past him. I don't know what she said or did in those critical moments, the details lost to the haze of trauma. But she escaped, slipping through the cracks of his control. When I picked her up, she looked changed, her face pale under the streetlights, eyes wide with a haunted expression, like someone who had just stood at the edge of something dark and abysmal, teetering on the brink before barely stepping back in time. Her posture was rigid, her movements deliberate, as if she was still processing the escape. I wanted to go back right then, fueled by a surge of protective rage. I wanted to confront him face to face, to let him know he couldn't do that to people, that there were consequences for wielding fear like a weapon. She stopped me, her hand on my arm, her voice firm despite the tremor beneath it. Please don't. There's something really wrong with him. That sentence still echoes in my head, a chilling refrain that plays on loop in quiet moments, because she was right, profoundly, terrifyingly right. At the time, I thought that was the end of it. A close call, narrowly averted, a bad night to chalk up to poor judgment. A creepy guy we'd never see again, relegated to the annals of what-if stories. But monsters don't disappear so easily. They lurk in the shadows, biding their time. And a few days later, he found me. After that night, things went quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that feels oppressive rather than peaceful. Life has a strange way of pulling you back into routine after fear, lulling you into a false sense of security, like it was all just a bad dream, dissipating with the morning light. Classes resumed with their monotonous lectures and scribbled notes. Work shifts dragged on with the usual banter and coffee runs. Conversations shifted to mundane topics. Weekend plans, exam stress, the latest campus gossip that had nothing to do with locked doors or raised voices. But even when things seem normal again, your body remembers the trauma in subtle ways. Every unknown number flashing on my phone screen made my chest tighten, a spike of anxiety I couldn't shake. Every late-night knock on the door echoed longer than it should have, sending my pulse racing as I peered through the peephole. Still, days passed without incident, each one layering over the memory like fresh snow, and I started to believe that we'd escaped something terrible without lasting consequences, that the storm had passed, leaving us unscathed. That belief didn't last long. A few days later, I logged into AOL Instant Messenger, the digital hub of our social lives back then. AIM was where everything happened. Flirtations sparked, friendships deepened, secrets shared in glowing chat windows. Conversations stayed logged in your mind, not archived neatly like they are now, in endless cloud storage. You didn't expect danger to come through a blinking chat window, innocuous and familiar. But there it was, a message popping up from a screen name I didn't recognize, something generic, unassuming. At first it was casual, almost friendly, luring me in with benign small talk. Then I read the next line, and the world narrowed to the glow of my computer screen. It was him. He didn't introduce himself formally. He didn't need to. The tone was unmistakable, a digital echo of the voice that had chilled me over the phone. The same smugness, dripping with self-assured arrogance, the same confidence, as if he owned the conversation from the start. Like we were continuing a dialogue that had never really ended, just paused for dramatic effect. Then he typed my full legal name. Not a nickname I went by casually. Not a shortened version friends used. The exact name on my birth certificate, spelled out with precision. I felt my stomach drop, a nauseating lurch that left me breathless. Then came my address. Not close or approximate. A vague guess that could be dismissed. Exact. Street name. House number. Zip code. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just harassment, a petty retaliation from a bruised ego. This was intentional, calculated, a deliberate invasion that required effort and intent. And in 2005, this kind of information wasn't easily accessible. There were no instant background checks or apps that spat out personal details for a fee. No social media profiles listing your life story for the world to see. He had gone looking, digging through whatever rudimentary means were available: phone books, campus directories, perhaps even following trails in person. The messages changed after that, shifting from casual to menacing with chilling speed. He told me he knew where I lived, describing landmarks near my home with eerie accuracy. He told me he could come anytime, day or night, without warning. Then he said it plainly, without flourish or hesitation. He was going to kill me. He was going to kill her. No dramatic language to heighten the threat. No rage-filled rants spilling over with emotion. Just statements, cold, like facts etched in stone, detached, as if discussing the weather, final, leaving no room for doubt or negotiation. At the time, I didn't react the way I should have, the way hindsight demands. I didn't panic, didn't let the fear consume me outwardly. I didn't call the police, filing a report that might have set alarms ringing. Instead, I told myself what most people tell themselves in moments like this. He's just a keyboard warrior, hiding behind a screen, words without weight, threats without teeth. I pushed back in the chat, my fingers flying over the keyboard with false bravado. I told him to meet me anytime, anywhere, name the place, and I'd be there. I told him I wasn't afraid, my words a shield against the creeping dread. Looking back, I don't know if that was bravery, a genuine stand against intimidation or denial, a refusal to acknowledge the depth of the danger. Here's the thing people don't talk about enough. Back then, monsters didn't look like monsters from fairy tales or movies. They didn't leave blatant trails online, no digital breadcrumbs screaming danger ahead. They didn't have profiles plastered with warning signs or forums buzzing with red flags. He was just a guy on a screen, pixels and texts that felt abstract, unreal. Screens make people feel distant, their threats diluted by the barrier of technology. So when the messages stopped abruptly, the chat window going silent, I exhaled, a long-held breath releasing in relief. I assumed he'd moved on, bored or deterred by my defiance. That assumption would haunt me for years to come. Weeks went by, blending into one another with the rhythm of everyday life. Life filled the space again, crowding out the shadows with routine and distraction. I stopped checking behind me when I walked to my car at night, the hypervigilance fading, the AIM screen name faded into memory, a relic of a bad chapter closed. Fear has a way of dulling when it doesn't get fed, retreating to the back of your mind like a forgotten scar. And then the news broke, shattering the fragile peace like glass underfoot. It started as a missing person report, the kind that flickers across TV screens and newspaper pages without much fanfare at first. A young woman had gone on a date with someone she met on MySpace, that burgeoning social network where connections were made with glittering profiles and top-paid friends lists. She never came home, vanishing into the night without a trace. At first it felt distant, another tragic headline in a world overflowing with them, sympathetic, but detached from my own life, until details emerged, trickling out in police statements and media reports. She had been assaulted, the violence brutal and unforgiving. She had been murdered, her life snuffed out in a senseless act. And what investigators described next made my blood run cold, a wave of recognition crashing over me. Her body had been mutilated, not out of panic, a frantic attempt to cover tracks, not out of rage, an explosive outburst, but deliberately, methodically, with cold precision to make identification harder, to delay the inevitable discovery. That detail changed everything, transforming a distant tragedy into a personal horror. Because that wasn't impulsive. a crime of passion gone wrong. That was methodical, planned with the detachment of a predator who viewed his victim as a problem to solve. When they released the suspect's name, I felt like the room tilted on its axis, the ground shifting beneath me. John Gomer. I stared at the screen, reading it again and again, willing the letters to rearrange into something else. The same man. The same dorm room where my friend had been trapped. The same threats that had invaded my AIM chats. The same voice that had mocked me over the phone. The weight of it settled slowly, like suffocation, pressing down until I could barely breathe. I thought about the night she was locked in that room, the seconds ticking by like a countdown. How close it was, how razor-thin the line really was between escape and tragedy, between walking away and becoming a statistic. And suddenly, all those messages I had brushed off felt different, their true menace revealed. They weren't bluffs, empty posturing from a coward. They were rehearsals, practice runs for the darkness he carried within. Here's the most unsettling part, the one that keeps me up at night even now. He didn't snap one day, didn't suddenly transform into a monster under pressure. He didn't become violent in a moment of weakness. He was always this person, the evil simmering beneath a facade of normalcy. We just met him early, in his nascent stages, before the world knew his name and the full extent of his depravity. He eventually pleaded guilty, not in a courtroom drama filled with tears and revelations, but in a calculated move. Not because he felt remorse, a shred of humanity piercing through, but because he wanted to avoid the death penalty, to preserve his own life even after extinguishing another's. That detail matters profoundly, because it shows you exactly who he was until the very end. The man driven by self-preservation, devoid of empathy, still grasping for control even in chains. I still think about the messages I ignored, replaying them in my mind like a broken record. The police report that never got filed, the opportunity to intervene lost to my denial, the warnings I didn't recognize for what they were harbingers of horror. And I wonder, in the quiet hours of reflection, if I had taken him seriously from the start, would that woman still be alive? Would her family have been spared the unimaginable grief? That question never really leaves you. It embeds itself in your soul. A perpetual what if. Sometimes, surviving something doesn't feel like relief, a triumphant escape. Sometimes it feels like a responsibility you never asked for, a burden of knowledge and regret. Because knowing how close you were to the abyss means carrying the weight of what happened to someone else, a shadow that follows you forever. I want to talk about what came after. The nightmares that invaded sleep like unwelcome intruders, the lasting fear that reshaped daily life, and why this story still matters today, in an era where technology has evolved but predators have adapted right alongside it. Most people think stories like this end when the killer is caught, the handcuffs clicking shut in a moment of justice. They don't. That's just where the news coverage stops, the cameras turning away to the next sensation. For the people who brushed past the danger, who felt its breath on their necks, for the ones who survived by inches, mere twists of fate, that's where the real haunting begins, because life goes on, relentless and indifferent. And somehow, you're expected to go with it, piecing together a new normal from the fragments. The weight of survival after his arrest, everything felt unreal, as if I were watching my own life unfold on a distant screen, detached and disorienting. Like observing a movie where the plot twists hit too close to home, I kept replaying the same moments over and over in my mind. The phone ringing insistently, its tone, a harbinger of trouble. The locked door, unyielding and symbolic of entrapment. The argument over the phone, words, sharp as blades, the AIM messages popping up like digital ghosts. Every memory became sharper with time, not blurry like fading dreams, but vivid, intrusive, impossible to escape or compartmentalize. They intruded at odd moments, during lectures, while eating, in the middle of conversations, pulling me back into the past. I didn't feel lucky to have escaped unscathed. I felt guilty, a heavy cloak of what-ifs and should-haves. Survivor's guilt. People don't talk enough about survivor's guilt outside of war zones and natural disasters, where it's acknowledged as a psychological scar. But it exists here too, in the quiet aftermath of near misses and brushed encounters with evil. Quietly, seeping into your thoughts like ink in water. Relentlessly, resurfacing when you least expect it. I kept thinking, why hurt the young woman from MySpace and not the girl I picked up that night, shaken but alive? Why did we walk away with our lives intact when someone else didn't? Her story cut short in brutality. There's no answer that makes peace with that question, no logical explanation to soothe the ache. Only silence, vast and unyielding, leaving you to grapple with the randomness of fate. The girl who escaped, she tried to move on, throwing herself into studies and social circles with forced enthusiasm. We all did, pretending the incident was a blip, a story to bury. But something had changed in her, a subtle shift in her demeanor that spoke volumes. In both of us, really a fracture in the foundation of trust. You don't get locked in a room by someone like that and walk away untouched, as if it were just a bad dream. Your instincts sharpen to a razor's edge, alerting you to every potential threat. Your trust fractures, splintering into caution where openness once was. Every closed door feels heavier than it should, a reminder of confinement. Every smile from a stranger gets examined a little too closely, searched for hidden malice. She became more vigilant about her surroundings, double-checking locks and sharing her plans with friends. I did too, our shared experience forging an unspoken bond of wariness. The internet afterward, what haunted me most was how ordinary it all was, how the tools of everyday life became weapons. A dorm room, meant for study and rest, turned into a cage. A chat app like AIM, designed for connection, twisted into a conduit for terror. A dating profile on MySpace, a space for flirtation and fun, exploited as a hunting ground. Nothing that looked dangerous on the surface. No neon signs warning of peril. In 2005, the internet felt exciting, a frontier of endless possibilities, free from the constraints of the physical world, where anonymity bred creativity, uncharted, with new platforms popping up and users exploring without maps. We didn't yet understand how predators adapted faster than rules ever could, slipping through the cracks like smoke. He used MySpace the way hunters use camouflage, blending in with charming profiles and innocuous messages. He used AIM the way stalkers use silence, lurking until the moment to strike. And we were still learning what danger looked like online, naive to the shadows lurking behind screens. Today, with data breaches and doxing commonplace, it seems quaint, but back then, it was a rude awakening to the double-edged sword of connectivity. The messages revisited years later, I thought about those AIM messages again, pulling up old logs on a dusty hard drive for closure. How calm they were, devoid of exclamation points or caps lock fury. How unemotional, statements delivered like grocery lists. That was the part I misunderstood at first. The subtlety of true menace. I expected rage, threats fueled by explosive anger that might burn out quickly, threats that screamed for attention, easy to dismiss as hot air. But real danger doesn't always sound angry or unhinged. Sometimes it sounds certain, quiet and assured, like an inevitable fact. That's what chills me now, the cold precision of it all. What the signs really were, looking back with the clarity of time. The signs were everywhere, scattered like breadcrumbs leading to darkness. The control he exerted, locking the door as if it were his right. The lack of empathy, his irritation at our interference rather than concern for her fear. The way he spoke like people were objects, not humans, with feelings and rights disposable, manipulable. The way he enjoyed fear, savoring the power it gave him like a fine wine. But when you encounter evil before it has a name, before it's labeled and catalogued in news reports, you don't recognize it for what it is. You rationalize it as awkwardness or eccentricity. You minimize it as overreaction on your part. You tell yourself it's nothing, just a weird guy having a bad day, until it's everything. A full-blown nightmare unfolding for someone else. The trial and the plea. When he pleaded guilty, it wasn't the closure I had hoped for. No cathartic courtroom moment. It was confirmation, a stark validation of the gut feeling we had that night. Confirmation that the something really wrong we sensed was not paranoia but truth. That something deeply wrong had been standing right in front of us, cloaked in normalcy. He didn't plead guilty because he felt remorse, a wave of guilt washing over him. He did it to save himself, negotiating for life in prison over execution. Even at the end, he was still choosing control, still prioritizing his survival over atonement. The trial details, sparse as they were in his plea deal, painted a picture of calculated horror that aligned perfectly with the man we'd encountered. The name that never leaves John Gulmer, a name forever attached to a headline, synonymous with tragedy in true crime circles. But to me, it will always be the voice on the phone, .com, and mocking. The screen name in my AIM window, blinking with malice, the presence that brushed past my life and left scars anyway, invisible but indelible. Even now, typing it evokes a shiver, a reminder of vulnerability. Why I'm telling this now, I didn't tell this story for a long time, burying it deep where it couldn't hurt. Part of me wanted to forget to erase the memories, like deleting old files. Part of me was afraid of remembering too clearly, of reopening wounds that had scabbed over. But stories like this matter, especially in a world where online interactions are ubiquitous. Because intuition matters, it's often the first line of defense. Because discomfort is a warning, a biological alarm bell. Because sometimes the thing that feels off is the only signal you get before something irreversible happens. A subtle cue in a sea of noise. Telling it now feels like a duty, a way to honor the lessons learned the hard way. To anyone listening, if someone makes your skin crawl for no clear reason, listen to that feeling. Don't dismiss it as rudeness. If something feels wrong, even if you can't explain why, trust it. Act on it without apology. Politeness has never saved lives. It's a societal nicety that predators exploit. Instinct has, time and again, pulling people back from the edge. In today's world, with apps and algorithms connecting us instantly, these lessons are more relevant than ever. The final reflection, I think about that night often, the what-ifs branching out like alternate timelines, about how close we were to a different ending, about how survival sometimes comes down to timing, chance, and one decision not to go back, to let go of confrontation and prioritize safety. And I think about the woman who didn't get that chance, whose life was stolen in a moment of misplaced trust. She deserves to be remembered, not just as a headline in a forgotten archive, but as a life that mattered, full of potential and dreams cut short. Her story intertwined with ours, a tragic thread in the tapestry. Closing words, soft, somber. Sometimes the scariest part of a true crime story isn't the violence, graphic and shocking though it may be. It's realizing how easily you could have been part of it, how arbitrary the line between bystander and victim, how close evil came to knowing your name, because once, it already did, whispering threats through screens and locked doors. If you made it to the end of this story, thank you for listening, for bearing witness to the echoes. If stories like this matter to you, please like this episode, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss future true crime stories. And if you feel comfortable, let me know in the comments or reviews. It helps me understand how far these stories travel and why they need to be told, to prevent history from repeating in new digital forms. Stay aware, stay safe, and trust your instincts. They're the quiet guardians in a noisy world.